All right, continuing with the blob brush. And remember, this is all about your personality. So even if something looks like a perfect circle in my design, I'm going to try to draw it rather than use the shape tool because I want that character. And then to improve it, because circles are tough, especially with kind of bleeding at the edges, that's where I use my pencil tool and the small selection arrow. Right? You start on the path, you end on the path, it will smooth it out for you if you set the tool to smooth, which you get to by double clicking on it, just like the blob brush. And then inside, outside. That's why I love the blob brush rather than the brush tool. The brush tool allows you to do strokes, which are not as useful because strokes don't give you an inside and outside edge on a fill path. So this is much better for the kind of digital inking we're doing. Okay, now I continue with my blob brush. And as I draw across, you're going to see how that blobs into the lines I just drew of the handle, and it all becomes one vector shape. Right? The regular brush tool also makes each stroke separate. So really, I can't stand the regular brush tool. So we always want the blob brush for digital inking. It is wonderful. This is me being really picky, but it just helps me practice these skills. Cleaning up edges. And it looks like it's going to be a little bit of that line coming through here. The hilt of the sword, so I got to draw that. Otherwise it's going to look kind of weird. And now the stripes on the sword. This is on the scabbard of the sword. Some decoration. This is kind of Nico as a vagabond knight. But the sword is still pretty nice. And then the cap. Metal cap at the end of the scabbard. So I actually don't want it to line up with the foot, so I'm going to push it up a little bit. In design, that's something called a tangency, when things uncomfortably touch. So that's where your inking can be improved, can improve upon your sketch. That'll work. And now I got to clean that up, where these overlaps happen. So first, I'm just going to combine all these overlapping ones because they were made on different days. Holding down Command and Shift, selecting all of them. There we go. And now use the merge to put them all into one vector, and now I can use the pencil tool for all of it. Smooth out my overlaps. And you can see for professional work how this comes in really, really handy because you can really have exact control of everything. Well, straight lines can be very hard to draw with an inking pen, right, traditionally. So when you have that smooth function, it really helps. And then little gaps like that can happen in inking, so you just redraw it. But yeah, trying to keep straight lines straight can be a real pain. And now I wanted these little jewels or these little decorations on the scabbard, so try not to be too fussy about them. Now here's something we don't usually do. You can also select your shape and then move it and stretch it with that large selection tool. And sometimes that's really helpful. When you paint them with the blob brush and they're separate. Right. There we go. And now I'm just going to fix this, and then I might be done with my line art. As some of you are. And we get to have fun with the next step. Remember, we're only using black fill shapes. We're not using any strokes. We're not using any white. And I think that is everything. So now I'm going to double click on the rotate hand tool. It's all straight up. And now to check it, I turn off my sketch layer and I use my large selection tool. I draw a big box around everything I've inked. I can zoom out. I move it onto the gray to make sure there's no white on it at all. Right? And while it's all selected, you can see little places where it overlaps. I'm just going to merge that all with the Pathfinder tool. So now it's all just one clean vector. Just like one big stamp of ink. It's very memory efficient. And I move it back onto my artboard with that large selection tool. And now first I save it as an AI file. I can just do Command S because I've already named it. And now I'm going to save it as the two transferable vector formats. I have them up on the whiteboard, so you can open them up in Photopea, we can open them up in Photoshop, and we can keep them as vectors that then we color behind. So I'm going to say save as to my computer always, and I'm going to change it from an AI file to an EPS. This is called a transferable Adobe vector format. So it works between Adobe programs. And because Photopea is still not working on my computer, very annoying, I'll just make sure. I think it has to do with the campus firewalls because it works fine. Because I'm on wireless connection here. It works fine when I'm at home. But yes, so I'm going to need that EPS because I'm going to be building it in Photoshop. Next, File, Save As. And to my computer, and I'm going to choose SVG, which is a more generalized transferable vector format. You can open it in vector.com that way. But remember, vector.com doesn't allow you to save out as a vector. So we're using Illustrator so that we can save out as a vector. And now my line art, my digital inking is done, the second requirement of the assignment. And it looks pretty good. I'm sure there are little things that could be corrected, and I always notice them when I get into the coloring. But definitely good enough for a spot illustration. Think of it as a coloring book page. So now I'm done with Illustrator. I can close Illustrator. Yes?
box it in, how do you then pick it up and put it over the gray?
So when you have your large selection tool and you've boxed it, that is like a transform box. So you just click in the middle of it and you can move it around.
Right or left?
Either way. Are you trying to grow it or just move it?
Just move it over to the gray.
Yeah, so you can just click it in the middle of the box with that black triangle and then move to the right or the left or up or down. Okay, I'll come help. All right, so a lot of you, raise your hand if you have your vector saved now, your line art. Great, more than half of you. So you have to find out where that's saved, and you want to make sure you mark it. So the EPS really matters. I mark that as gray. The SVG is just good to have for safekeeping, especially for using on your own. And then the AI file, this is fully updated. Now we can post our next requirement. The first requirement is our sketch, right? So our next requirement is the line art, but we cannot post a vector to Canvas because it's not an online format, right? So requirement number 2 is clean vector line art. But how do we post it to Canvas? Well, we have to rasterize it in a way, just like we did with our logos. So just like we do with our logos, we're going to open up Photoshop on its own. We are not going to open up our vector in Photoshop. We're just going to open up Photoshop on our own. Then we're going to say File, New. File, New. And then we're going to name it with our name, Assignment 5, Spot Illustration. I always want you to use your name and some description. And mine is Rinfair Nico. And what size do we want? Just like we did for our logo to print them for our midterm critique, we want a minimum of 8 by 10 inches. And if your illustration is wider than it is tall, you can do 10 by 8 inches. And I'm going to use a minimum of 300 pixels per inch. I'm going to use 350 because Photoshop's very powerful. And that's my kind of studio preferred resolution. All right, so we've named it. And now we have a white grid of pixels. If I check the image size is 8 by 10 by 350 pixels per inch. Now what I do is I grab my EPS file, this one, the one that doesn't have a preview icon, and I drag and drop it in so that it stays a smart object. And then I pretend that this is my black mat, and I'm going to hold down Option to center it, and then hit Return. So now I've placed it. It's a smart object. I'm immediately going to lock it because this is a vector. And right now it's a vector that is showing at a rasterization of 8 by 10 inches at 350 pixels per inch. But I at any time could say image size, make this 30 by 40 inches, and then it would be perfectly clean at that resolution because the smart object is referencing the EPS vector. So we want to leave it that way. And we want to lock it that way. That's going to be important for our coloring. Now to post it to Canvas, all I have to do is say File, Save a Copy, and then save this as a JPEG. We want the white background so we can see your clean line art very clearly. And I'll just save it to the desktop so you can see it. And even at the maximum size, the least compression possible is a JPEG. This is only 1.4 megabytes, even at a high resolution. That's because vectors are so efficient. So now I'm going to post that, and then I'll come help you guys get yours set up in Photoshop. Because we're also going to use that Photoshop file with the floating layer of our vector line art to do our coloring. But now I've got 2 out of 3 requirements posted. I've got my sketch, and I've got my clean vector line art. Okay, now I have to figure out how to color this line art. And I've already made kind of a rough color composite, so I'm going to drag that to the desktop using the campus colors. But I can find other inspirations.